Hello Guardians, and welcome to episode 113 of Podcast vs. Enemies, a Destiny podcast dedicated to the PvE sandbox. This week we're going to take a little look at some upcoming sandbox changes in addition to breaking down everything Prismatic. As always, I'm joined by my Titan and Warlock friends, Impetus and Saint. Saint, how are you doing and what have you been up to?
I am doing pretty good, enjoying the end of the summer here. It's been a pretty good week in Destiny, going through Salvation's Edge challenges, got a few more just in encounter triumphs and static challenges and stuff like that to knock out for that Iconoclast title. Still chasing the perfect riposte role. I really like this auto rifle way too much, and it's a problem because comp, is the only way to get it. So it's actually been okay in comp these days, dare I say. Still not quite gotten what I'm looking for on that repulsive race to stabilizing role, but we keep going. It may slow down a little bit because I also started playing The Witcher 3 this week. I got this on sale a long time ago, and I feel like there was just enough time that I could sit down one night after work and really start digging into that. And I'm like probably 4 hours in, and I'm definitely getting how this game has gotten the praise that it has gotten over the years so far. It's strong first impressions. Trying to get down to fighting a little bit better, but we'll get there eventually. And just general stuff. Still prepping for the next D&D campaign. I'm trying to write a lot more stories that are more, side quests and things like that are written explicitly with the backgrounds and traits of my party in mind. So trying to make, just trying to make the stories a little bit more meaningful them in the new campaign. Now that I've, gotten one campaign under my belt and feel a little bit, just more experience there. And it's definitely it's kind of like designing a game that you get to watch play out right in front of you. And that is great and horrible versus a lot of video games and things like that. You just have to work on it and then just put it out there and see how people react. But yeah, making up plot lines for D&D is something I started doing in our first campaign, and it is devastating when nobody pays attention to the little hook that you put out there, but incredibly rewarding when the party latches on to the story and runs with it. Yeah. Impetus, how about you, man? How you doing?
It's funny, Court. He was explaining this to me before we started getting ready for the podcast, and I was saying between Witcher 3 and D&D, this might be the last episode Saint ever does for PvE. I mean, he might be gone for good. Those are not light projects, either one of them. But
hey, I'm going on vacation shortly, so maybe it's.
Oh, okay.
It's been a good run,
All right. Hey. I'll hold down the fort until you guys come back, I guess. I've not actually had a lot of Destiny time this week. I had family over. I had a cousin get married yesterday. Had a great time seeing my parents, and then of course going to the wedding and stuff. So hadn't done a ton of Destiny. I logged on early this morning to do a little bit of stuff. I did unlock the Time-Worn Wayfarer for crafting. Got that leveled up a little bit. Very excited for that. I've been working on the Solstice armor bounties, just started, so I can't really even comment on the system, but I know there are some thoughts and feelings about new Solstice, as always, it seems like. And then I've been doing some overthrow to try and get a few more exotic class items. I've already gotten 2 to drop this morning, which matches the 2 that I've had drop for my Warlock all up until this point. Still haven't gotten any roles that I'm chasing for, any of the roles that I'll be talking about this episode, but glad to see those drop buffs. That's been huge at least. And of course, also been chasing Ergo Sum rolls along with my class items. So yeah, that's kind of all that stuff is really just going to be the focus for me going into the next week. Keep doing seasonal stuff to get more weapon red borders, finally get a crafted aberrant action, keep working on Solstice stuff while it's around, and then of course chase the exotic weapon and class item. How about yourself, Court?
Yeah, so did a normal Salvation's Edge run with Saint and some of his nerds, and still no exotic, but we did get a nice kind of clean, fast run. I think it was the first time that we did the fourth encounter one try, because every other time it's been multiple tries to get through it, just with a lot of jumping through hoops and just a lot of cross contamination with comms can cause some issues. But that was our first, or at least my first first through Verity. Going to try and get some of those static triumphs for the raid done over the next few weeks that Saint was talking about, and try and get some of those extra exotic buffs at some point. Get the exotic. I really want to try the strand fusion rifle or linear fusion rifle.
Oh yeah, Euphony, right?
Yeah, Euphony. Yeah, it just seems a lot of fun. Just threadlings the build, I guess. Outside of Destiny, the game, but still within Destiny, my damage stacking infographics now out for everyone. You can view that over on our Discord, the Patreon, my socials, my spreadsheet, links to all of those places in the science link tree in the show notes. And I'm just currently working on refreshing the Prismatic infographic over the next few weeks. And outside of Destiny, I've been playing a little bit of COD, Grand Theft Auto 5, I've mentioned a few episodes now, and EU4. And like I said, it will be soon time for my annual breakaway to the Scottish Highlands in a hot tub, so things are starting to wind down, because I am feeling a little bit tired. Still keen to do Destiny, still keen to be with my lads here doing Podcast versus Enemies, but just, after a few months after a big expansion, you do feel that kind of like ground down. It's time to take a little break. All right, Impetus, who are we thanking this week?
We are giving a shout out to our Grandmasters. Those are the folks that go above and beyond in their support of our show, and we are eternally grateful to them. They are Dark Wizard 85, David, Deacon, I'm K. Rose, Jellied Puppy, The Shazzle, The Puckster, The Mirror, and This Moment. Thank you so much for your support, guys. It means the world to us. You can send us all kinds of feedback directly to any of our socials or via our Discord server, our Twitter account, which is at Pod versus Enemies, or our Patreon. You can find links in the show notes. Positive, critical, and constructive feedback helps with the trajectory of the podcast and how we present and break down builds, activities, and so much more in the PvE sandbox for all kinds of Destiny players. We do, of course, want to extend a special thanks and appreciation to everyone that supports PvE by downloading, listening, and discussing our show and directly supporting us via Patreon. Speaking of Patreon, if you'd like to support us, you can click on the link to Patreon found in the show notes of this episode. You'll get access to members-only channels in our Discord server, behind-the-scenes content, text write-ups of weapon breakdowns, input on the future of the show, and so much more. Saint, what are we talking about today?
We got a bunch of stuff to cover. We're going to start off with more just say a sandbox, kind of coming off of last week's episode on some upcoming changes. I wasn't really expecting to see this, but definitely excited about it. After that, we're going to spend some time talking about Hunter, Titan, and Warlock Prismatic Builds and the kind of meta game behind that, as well as exotic class items and Ergo Sum rolls, the exotic special swords. So starting off with a bunch of sandbox stuff and upcoming changes for, I believe, episode 2, and then a lot of prismatic stuff, and all those things kind of tie into each other from subject to subject there. So a few quick housekeeping notes, updates, etc. before we jump into some upcoming sandbox changes. The reserve changes that just hit the game this past week resulted in a +1 to all rocket total ammo capacity, including exotics. Just a straight up buff. Other weapons also seem to be a flat buff, so keep an eye on Mossy Max's sheet. He's got a lot of good info on there about reserves and ammo capacity and stuff like that. Swords got increases of adaptives got 7, aggressives got +6, lightweights +8, and then Ergo got +5. Machine guns around 45 to adaptives and high impacts, and 69 to the rapid fires. Snipers didn't receive a buff. It actually, based on the numbers, looks like their previous reserve buff was reverted, and this is a known bug. So generally net win on the whole reserve changes, despite the fact that I think some people are, just aggravated or frustrated about the lack of swapping off when rallying, but I'm totally fine with just taking a +1 on my rocket, inventory permanently and not having to deal with that. How you guys feeling about the reserve changes? Net win?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take more bullets or more sword swings.
Yeah, I mean, it felt like the everyone had a loadout dedicated to just having a chest with like maximum reserves. So I suppose that was never intended, but they have given us a net buff. I suppose some of us may miss that. I certainly don't. I'm not a big fan of like loadout builder mini game behind the scenes. So this is a net buff to everything. Yeah, when I was working on the rocket launchers, pretty much, well, not pretty much, all of the rocket launchers got +1 everywhere. I think just some minor exceptions with like Wardcliff Coil and Eyes of Tomorrow. They were the only ones that didn't receive an extra +1 with 2 reserves and 3 reserves. But I think that's intended just with how they are built. Their reserves are tuned separately. But I'm just looking at my sheet now. You can get 15 Truth rockets with 2 reserves, which is, it's still Truth, but 15 exotic rockets, 3 in the magazine, so it's 5 reloads. Pretty fun to have.
Does the total damage on that work out like at all?
It's still pretty low. It's almost like a high impact, but not quite. It's got like slightly less damage than a high impact normally has, even with the buff to it's receiving like all of the explosive damage now does the full damage instead of it just doing the standard explosive. They just basically merged impact and explosive damage with Truth, where obviously Truth couldn't perform impact damage with the way horseshoes and grenades actually works. Air bursts, so they change it so all of the damage now applies to the explosive, but still quite not there in terms of like a high impact. But I think this is, we'll talk about some upcoming sandbox changes in a moment here, but this could be just like one of those exotics that's got one more buff to go, and then it's like, okay, now it's pretty good. It's not going to break any, it's not going to break anything. It's certainly not going to be the next Galahorn or Two-Tailed Fox or Dragon's Breath. It's not going to be like that, but it's just that one tiny thing. Speaking of Dragon's Breath and Galahorn, it now has 13 rockets with 3 reserves, which is kind of crazy to see. I mean, Galahorn didn't need another reserves buff, but it got it.
Yeah, so they're 10 base right now?
Yeah, 10, 11, 12, 13.
Oh, man, yeah, that's a lot of rockets, dude.
And like Deathbringer's 10, 11, 12, 12, just with it having a slightly smaller inventory size stat. And looking at like legendaries here, so before Apex used to be 7, 8, 9, 9. It's now 8, 9, 10, 10. So just think of any rocket launcher, if you can remember how many reserves it had before at maximum, just add +1. And that's your new number. So really good change.
Yeah, I think that's going to go over aggregate pretty well. There was also a change that basically caps your momentum when you're stacking up shots from mountaintop. It put like a clamp on the movement speed, and the speedrunners out there are not happy, Bob. And it looked really dramatic at first, and then I saw some clips that looked, maybe it wasn't so bad, and I think they even came out and said, hey, we may have slightly overcorrected on this. Maybe that'll get toned back a little bit, which... I mean, it's a very, very tiny portion of, people that this affected, but it was kind of allowing some obscene movement. If you knew how to stack up all the sticky shots and launch yourself, it was pretty ridiculous. So I'm not super surprised they fixed it. They may have overcorrected slightly on that. And I think the other big change was the class item drop rates this week, which is kind of a mixed bag on that. Your regular chests in the Pale Heart are not dropping class items nearly as much, but the overthrow chests are dropping more. Do you guys farm any overthrow this week? Emphasis, I know you've been grinding some overthrow. You get any class items to drop? How many runs you got? What's your anecdotal kind of feelings there?
Yeah, anecdotally, when I logged in and immediately went to the Pale Heart, I think the first chest I opened dropped me 1, but I had not had any drop from me from a chest up until that point. So I think that was probably just a little bit of, here you go, here's your first one. You've been building it up in the background. I don't know. Again, anecdotally. I then went another hour. I ended up doing 2 full, so that was part of my first full overthrow. Then I did another full overthrow with nothing, and then it was sometime during my third full overthrow I got the second one, and I think it was like in the second wave of the third full overthrow. So it ended up being about an hour's worth of time. I got 2. And I have yet to do my Dual Destiny this week. So that's another guaranteed 2 just on my Warlock. I've been on the same class for all this. So yeah, I certainly think, for me, and I imagine for some people, they'll probably just log on, do a Dual Destiny, see if they get lucky there. And if not, if they're really committed, you can go into Overthrow and see if you want to grind out. I don't know. I think for myself, as someone who plays multiple classes, I'll probably just stick to doing Dual Destiny 1 to 3 times a week and look at my 2 and then kind of move on to other stuff for my playtime in general. That's just kind of my thoughts, but I don't know about how you guys have been thinking about it, if you guys have tried Overthrow or Dual Destiny since the buff.
Yeah, I'm with you on the whole. I'll go take my Titan and actually run through, because I want to do several Pathfinder resets for more sword rolls, Ergo Sum rolls. And then, like you're talking about, okay, Hunter and Warlock, my second characters, you guys get 1 Dual Destiny run a week. Hope you get lucky, because I'm not farming for stuff on the alts court.
Yeah, I have noticed the drop change with Overthrow, but I still think there needs to be just a kind of amplification across the board. If they still want to keep it with, and I do agree with that, they should keep it within the Pale Heart. I'm not too interested in grinding out like playlist activities to get exotic class items. I'm not sure if that's really the play, but definitely in Pale Heart, I think just there needs to be more things to really kind of like guarantee to have a drop, like the co-op challenge campaign missions. They could have like a guaranteed at the end, because those are quite long anyway. So I just think there more places for them to drop at a higher drop rate is better than kind of spreading it around the game, at least for me. Yeah, I can't remember. I'm trying to find it. I don't know if it was in the Twid or if it was Destiny 2 team on Twitter that mentioned that they're still going to look at like further improvements to exotic class item, but I can't for the life of me.
They said that, and again, I don't know if it was the Destiny 2 team account or if it was DMG on his own account talking to somebody, because I know that he's in control of both of those accounts, and he has pivoted speaking between those 2 accounts on matters. But yes, I saw that as well, and it was on Twitter that they confirmed that.
Yeah, we're getting there. We're getting there with the exotic class times, which we'll be talking about much more later in this episode. But for now, let's keep moving. Also, on the housekeeping side, we've got some more posts going up this week. We'll have Aberrant Action, Corrasion, and the Mountaintop write-ups all going up on the Patreon in that weapons breakdown collection. You can go in there and see all kinds of various write-ups on weapons that we've talked about in the show in previous episodes and exotics that we love, all that stuff. Okay, let's get into the upcoming Sandbox changes. Court, take it away.
Yeah, so last episode we talked about general sandbox health for weapons, armor, and abilities. So if you want to check that out, pause this and go back and listen to that, and come back here, and we'll do a kind of quick, brief breakdown of what's to come. Again, this is related to episode 2 Revenant, so we'll be just touching on some highlights. So I'll kick us off here with weapons, and they are buffing. This isn't exclusive. There's obviously things more than just these 2, but they specifically mentioned adaptive SMGs and rapid fire heavy grenade launchers are going to be buffed because they are currently underperforming. Your adaptive SMGs include Parabellum, which is solar with Field Forged, Bug Out Bag, which is again another solar, and that is from the Deep Season 21. Hero's Burden, which is from Iron Banner, and that is Void. Pizzicato is kinetic, and that is Ursuro's adaptive SMG. And technically, this should also include Wrist Runner. Not that it needs it, because it's Wrist Runner. But with Wrist Runner having the same RPM, and it's not a lightweight, it should get these adaptive SMG changes. We've talked about the sort of DPS or the damage kind of output with a lot of kind of primary weapons recently. Adaptive SMGs aren't too bad in terms of DPS, but they do lack that defining trait. So their direct competitors are lightweights, and they share the same RPM, but obviously lightweights have that really great intrinsic frame bonus of just being faster mobility. You get increased movement speed when you're walking. So it's I think adaptives aren't too bad, like I said, but lightweights I think just kind of steal their limelight. Rapid fire grenade launchers, they include Swarm of the Raven. There's not actually there's not a few of these. It's just kind of, at least recently we've got 4. So Swarm of the Raven, which is Void, Iron Banner, Caraxes' Distress, which is Strand from Root of Nightmares, Marsilian Sea, which is Solar, which is our hacky grenade launcher, and Tarnation, which is Arc from way back in Throne World. And again, this technically should include Anarchy, with this being kind of matching the RPM, and maybe include Colony and Prospector. They've got slightly different RPMs, but they could receive the rapid fire frame buff. Again, I don't think they specifically mentioned Prospector later on, but I don't think any of these really need a damage buff. I think it's more of a utility or kind of an exotic buff specifically. Rapid fire GLs, lads. What were we thinking? We haven't really spoke about GLs recently, but obviously, when you've got something like Edge Transit, that is not our rapid fire. That is our that's our adaptive. What's our kind of? Why would we use an adaptive over a rapid fire and vice versa?
Because you don't have one of the right element. I feel like you're
God damn.
I mean, there are some good options out there, for what we get a little more like serious about it. Caraxes' Distress is, I would say, a very solid weapon, right? It's got a lot of good ammo traits. It just doesn't have bait and switch, and that really high ceiling has pushed some of the other stuff out. And now it's you look at Frenzy is a fine trait, and even could hang on back, just a few updates ago. But that 15% is only half of what you're getting with bait and switch, and Full Court as a trait just needs a little bit of love. Speaking of, there's some traits coming up here in that are mentioned. They're going to be getting some updates, but yeah, I really wish Full Court would see an update. I want to say that, there are still some scenarios in which, you're matching the right element, whatever the case may be, that you might want to reach for something like Caraxes. Maybe they'll have a little bit more differentiation. Tarnation has one for all, I'm pretty sure. Is interesting. It still doesn't get a lot of play these days, but maybe if that archetype sees a buff, we could see a little bit more play out of that. Yeah, and then, Marsilian Sea, it's just kind of an odd, I don't know. It's just an odd weapon. It's got like explosive light, I believe. And I think like Envious as well. I'm looking through this list of these grenade launchers, and they're all fine, right? There's some solid options in all of these things. There's just no reason really to be grabbing one of these over your other, heavy GL options, which I think is what has led to the situation that we're in right now. And they're talking about where nobody's really using these things. I kind of get it. Impetus,
I think you've hit the...
Oh, go ahead.
No, Impetus, actually, you go ahead. See if you share the same sentiment I was about to say.
I had to look through all these weapons perk pools because I don't think about them ever. And yeah, it's a weird situation because on the one hand, we have 0 craftable adaptive SMGs, and the ones that we just mentioned, the 4 Parabellum, Bug Out Bag, Hero's Burden, and Pizzicato, are not easy to acquire. I believe Parabellum is currently Lost Sector loot, so have fun there. Bug Out Bag would be Xur now, because it's got to be where it's dropping, if it even is available. Hero's Burden, Iron Banner, Pizzicato is now at Banshee. You would have to put in your gunsmithing grams. That would be 3 for a random roll of Pizzicato on a day that has Soros. So that is a dire situation in terms of, we're going to buff an archetype. There's really, I hope you held on to one of those. I mean, again, Parabellum, very good solar SMG, not easy to get. Rapid fire heavy GLs, Carax's Distress seems like it's poised to really take off. I mean, it's a raid weapon. It's got an adept variant. For the others, though, Tarnation's craftable, so that's 2 out of the 4. But yeah, I don't know. It's just not spectacular on any of the perks. And I feel like we have pretty stellar options on the adaptive side already. Like I don't really see myself going crazy. I would probably do a Caraxis more than anything because it's a good perk pool, but it's Strand, and our only other Strand heavy GL at this time is Trials Loot, which can be very hard to go and grab an adept version of compared to Caraxis, where you could just get a bunch of spoils, go do a Master Nezarec, go farm, spend them at the chest and really profit. So yeah, I'm not, it's just one of those things where if it does come along on the GL side, I'm like, sweet, let's see if I can get a good roll. But if not, I have plenty of good adaptive versions. Were you feeling the same way? Were you feeling different?
I think both of you kind of hit it on the nail in regards to a lot of these frames. I'm not convinced it's entirely because of the frame itself underperforming. I think it's just we don't have a lot of choice. I mean, you mentioned there with the SMGs, the one thing that we have currently in terms of an adaptive SMG is Parabellum. The rest they are acquirable, but they're just quite difficult to acquire. And it's the same with rapid fire heavy grenade launchers. I just don't think we've got enough to then make a kind of point of, okay, now we can start buffing the subfamily, because as far as I'm aware, rapid fire heavy GLs are performing quite well. I mean, we recommended Caraxis quite a lot for kind of burst damage builds. They have a slightly smaller magazine overall compared to adaptives, but they have a higher RPM, so like they are going to be better in terms of just getting a lot of damage down range in a fast time. So I think I'm certainly not opposed to both of these frames getting buffed, and I'm sure there'll be other frames that they haven't mentioned here, but I would have loved to have seen maybe a little bit more variation of the weapons and the perks before we started seeing some buffs. But hey ho, I'm happy to see some buffs to these. If they are underperforming, as Bungie says they are, then fair enough. Go off.
This conversation has got me thinking. This is coming in episode 2, right?
Yeah,
it's like about 7 weeks off or so. What do they know that we don't? I feel like this is a thing that they will do where we sometimes will read buffs like this, and we're looking at the existing weapon set, and it doesn't make a lot of sense because we're not, this is conjecture. Let me be very clear. I do not know this, okay? I wouldn't surprise me if all of a sudden in the episode 2, your ritual weapon is a rapid fire GL, and your comp weapon is an adaptive SMG, or a new Nightfall reward is a rapid fire GL, and a Gambit adaptive SMG hits the pool with 12 traits, and some of them are really stacked up, and all of a sudden these weapons that would have been like victim of their archetype, or maybe the first one to finally push the envelope a little bit forward there, are just like adding onto the pile of whatever's new. Because typically speaking, when things get large buffs, there's at least one version is made available in the game if it's not already. And that what got me thinking about that is Imtis is talking about the acquisition route for all these SMGs, and I'm like, yeah, a lot of these are not good at all. Surely they're giving me that feeling of, okay, there's going to be some adaptive SMG getting added in episode 2 that is going to be worth it and is going to be, probably pretty solid in PvE. Or that's my copium. Let's really please work out.
I think you're on the money here.
Yeah,
I think you're right. Yeah.
Exit strategy is adaptive SMG. That was the old Gambit weapon that could come back as the Gambit. But then the other one we forgot to mention here, actually one of our more recent rapid fires was a Cosmic coming in Festival of the Lost, which will be out by the time the episode 2 is around. So I have a good reason to go grab that. That was our Void our second Void Rapid Fire Heavy GL, because I think it was Swarm of the Raven came out in the Season of the Deep, and then we got a Cosmic later that year, and that has pretty good. I mean, again, we're looking at last year's version, which was the one and only version of a Cosmic, but that's a rapid fire frame. So yeah, you might be on the money there that, have a reason to go chase Exit Strategy and Gambit potentially, but then also a newly buffed Cosmic would be poised to take advantage of these. So good shout out, sir.
I've been playing this game too long, you guys. I
think you're right, because we received pulse rifle buffs, which affected all frames, not just specifically one, on top of a new frame coming out. So they do seem to be quite consistent with, we're buffing X weapon or X weapon frame, but that comes with, as Impetus is saying, perhaps a refreshed X amount of weapons, or on top of other like brand new frame or brand. I'm not pretending to think that we're going to get a brand new frame, and these are specifically just to adaptive SMGs and rapid fire heavy GLs. But that does kind of it lines up with previous patches where they do they introduce these on top of refreshing or just bringing back a few olders, and they specifically mentioned Prospector later on in terms of specific exotic builds. And I think from previous buffs, this should apply to Prospector. It's got a slightly different RPM, but this is just because it's an exotic. So Prospector's getting its own buff, and then if it gets a buff on top of Rapid Fire, it's another kind of doubling up of buffs. So yeah, you might be on the money there, Saint.
We got a few other quick ones. I'll just cover here real quick, and then we'll get to some of those exotics that Court just mentioned. We have greatly increased shotgun range in PvE.
Interesting.
That heavy burst shotgun archetype is going to go crazy next episode.
Well, what greatly? What's the vibe on greatly? What is our average shotgun range? Is like 7 meters?
7-8 meters? Yeah.
Yeah.
I only think of them in PvP terms, so it's like,
yep.
Yeah.
I love that it's in PvE too, because which makes me think either they're gonna juice it to high heaven to a degree that they absolutely could not do in PvP without destroying the special weapon balance, or it's like a little bit, but that's still too much. I don't know. I feel like it has to be like an extreme increase of some sort. But 10 meters would be noticeable, right? If it goes out to 10 now.
Yeah, because you're like 5 to 6 meters in the Crucible is like your average shoddy, which I'm guessing it's probably right at the same in PvE, right? Yeah, even double would be huge. I expect at least like 8 meters. If it's 6 right now and they're saying greatly increased, that would be at least like 25%, ish, whatever.
Right.
So 37%. Yeah. So it's maybe 50% of current range would be like a lot. I mean, that's a lot. That would, you're going from, let's say, 6 meters to 9. That would be still, I think, big.
If this is how they are trying to buff perks like Threat Remover and Barrel Constrictor, the ones where you have to land all the pellets in a shot to have an effect, if this is how they want to, roundabout buff those, I'm here for it. But yeah, I'm very curious to see what new shotgun range looks like in PvE and just PvE too, because if we're talking like Chaperone just absolutely gunning down enemies at crazy ranges, that's gonna be fun. I mean, again, I use shotguns a lot, mostly on Titan and Hunter, where the melee based exotics really go crazy with them. But I'll take blowing enemies away at a longer range. They're fun to shoot. They're shotguns.
Well, they've just been a 1-2 punch vessel, I feel like, and there's like a little bit of shotgun swapping and DPS phases. You're like whatever Slick Draw, Vorpal, and you have that on 2 weapons, and you just swap to basically circumvent the effective RPM, right? And there is something there, but those are like. Both of those things are like pretty niche. Either, you play a melee build or you're way up and close with the boss for like shotgun swapping. No in between play. Court, you got any shotguns that you like?
Well, back in the day, I used to be a Chaperone fiend, degenerate back in the classic PvP. when I was on controller, but I haven't touched it for a while. And also that was just PvP. So I'm very interested in what this will mean, and like what the general stat, the range stat will be for shotguns in the future. Like, what will that look like? Because again, Chaperone is mentioned later on in a moment. We'll talk about this, but that is getting an individual buff as well as, quote, greatly increased shotgun range in PvE. Assuming that's applying to all shotguns is what I'm reading.
Acreus to the moon. Yeah, that's what I'm feeling.
Okay, calm down there, Phil.
Wow. This makes me, more than anything, really, really want that, like, Discord chain reaction or like threat detector chain reaction roll on Dead Grammary. I've already been looking for that all season. And this, okay, side note on here. Do we think that the Domino and Dead Grammary are going to be into Lost Sector's next episode? Or are they going to wait until episode 3 to put episode 1's world loot into the Lost Sector?
I would think it would be the following episode, because that's how it was for the seasons. It was the following one they would eventually get added in.
I'm hoping so, because man, if we get to episode 2 and shotguns are like a really, actually, truly viable thing, I'll be farming till my thumbs bleed for that chain reaction thing, man.
I'm just thinking of tracked cannon as well. I wonder how that will perform with a bump to its range. Just being able to.
Tracked cannon stock's already been going up.
Keeps going up. It's just a line up. Very interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah, last short one here is significant weapon mod rework in addition to 10 plus new mods. Okay.
We've known about this. They had said as much that they were planning to expand the mod suite, but we now have a number. So very excited to see that. I have no idea what they are, what they could be. Hopefully they're more meaningful than our current suite, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we went from spec mods, only using spec mods, to only using backup mags. So hopefully we've got a little bit more choice. Again, in PvE, I know PvP is a little bit different. You've got a little bit more choice. Or sweaty confetti, I suppose. That's our other option in PvE.
10 variants of sweaty confetti coming right up.
Well, I'm hoping to see a lot of just, instead of adept range, adept blast radius, adept stability, adept whatever, all those targeting. Because like there already is targeting in like adept targeting or backup mag and adept mag. Well, what if we went what if we go back down and make regular +5 reload mods instead of adept reload, or +5 blast radius mods? But even still, that's like 5, baby. That mods right there, like stat mods. What the hell are the other? Yeah, I guess it would be 5 regular mods and then 10 sweaty confetti iterations, like you said. That would be 15. Yeah. So.
Well, there's two parts to this. It's significant weapon mod rework in addition of 10 plus new mods.
That's
so
a good point, Corey.
Yeah, we're getting more mods, but they've mentioned we're getting the current set of mods are getting reworked significantly. Well, again, that's not sure what that actually entails, but yeah, very interesting. I think it's one part of the weapon sandbox that's been kind of flagging behind. So. Another thing I'm looking forward to.
When was the last time you thought about a weapon mod?
Never.
And our final thing here, of course, the part that we always kind of wait for once we start getting towards the end of a season or now episode, what is getting buffed on the exotic front and the weapon perk front and the armor front with the following episodes. So they did name drop a few exotic weapons here: Huckleberry, Chaperone, Bad Juju, Ex-Dirus, Prospector, and of course, plus more. Always plus more. Interesting group. Again, no specifications on which side of the sandbox, both sides of the sandbox. These would be getting buffed. And Huckleberry hits like a truck still. I think it's just been overshadowed by all the years worth of newer exotics and legendaries that have come out since it debuted in Destiny 2. Chaperone, again, very, I assume PvE. I don't think that needs a buff in PvP. Bad Juju. I mean, this could be a PvE or PvP one. I've certainly used it in both sandboxes. I like Bad Juju quite a lot. Very fun weapon, very interesting weapon. X-Dirus definitely needs a buff. It kind of hits like a wet noodle. Very fun fantasy, which is, I think, what makes it sting a little bit extra, that it's just not quite as powerful as its enemy equivalent is. Prospector, again, like right on the edge of being meta. I mean, I certainly have used it for farming Perseus in Spire the Watcher. A small damage buff would be nice, but if there's also a different trait or mechanic that they want to give to it, I'd be interested to see what they're thinking. It has that burn effect. I wonder if they're planning on doing something more with the burn. Yeah, I have no idea. Any thoughts, any hopes for any of these weapons, guys, before you talk about the perks?
I feel like Bad Juju is right on the edge of being a meta pick. And it's what holds it back right now is how long it takes to get String of Curses going. It goes up to 5 times, and it's like 100% increase at 5x. If you're in an activity where you are at too high of a level deficit, though, it just really starts to fall off, because past like a 10-point-ish level deficit, it's really hard to get that train rolling. Because once you get that plus 100% buff to a rapid fire pulse rifle like this, it's really strong. But if you're only able to kill one enemy every 6 seconds or something like that, it's just never going to get there, and it doesn't feel great. So I'm hoping it's something that just kind of helps it kickstart it a little bit more, or something like that, because it has the potential, just quite hasn't been there. And yeah, Huckleberry and Chaperone, I use both those weapons in the Crucible still to this day. Huckleberry is a tough line to manage, because if you can burn through the magazine really quick, but if you are pretty skilled and you're actually hitting your shots, you can chain people down if you're holding on that trigger and kind of feathering the trigger. I use that a lot in the last couple of seasons of this previous year, when a certain pair of Titan boots was dominating in the meta. Cord, how you feeling?
Yeah, I'm totally in agreement that all of these are like one buff away from being like go-to weapons. Because I think Huckleberry, if you were quite happy with, I'm speaking in regards to like day one raids or kind of higher up content, Huckleberry does hit like a truck, and once you keep that Raging Bull going, you are unstoppable, and it can. If you've got this on a prismatic class, you're going to build up that transcendent energy fast, just with the nature of it being a fast and hard hitting weapon. It's also still got the proper OG Rampage from way back when Rampage used to be like 66%. So PvE still got that at 3 times stack. In PvP, it's just standard Rampage. So yeah, Yeehaw Rampage, as we've been calling it for a long time. X-Dirus, yeah, totally in agreement that I just one more buff, and I think it's going to be like, okay, I can use this now, because it has a lot of utility. It's just not quite there in terms of damage, and like I don't think anyone's asking X-Dirus to be like the next DPS option. It's just in harder content, I've tried to use it, and it's just not quite there. Last one I'll talk about, because the rest are like Chaperone and Bad Juju. Like, I'm totally in agreement with what Saint said there. Prospector, again, just one more buff, and I think it's going to be like our go-to for if you want to just. I don't have a particular role for a grenade launcher, so I'm just going to put Prospector on. It's still got that classic solar burn, even though this is an arc weapon. So I'm interested to see where they go with that. If they're just going to eliminate that entirely, or if they make it like our first arc dealing scorch damage weapon. I don't think that's going to happen, but Prospector, looking forward to what they do with that. Very fun weapon set. I've not thought about most of these for a while, so I'm looking forward to some buffs.
We did also get a short list here of perks. Very interesting list of perks that were name dropped here that are also getting buffs and are considered underutilized. So they mentioned the Iron Banner perks, all of those, Slideways, which I don't think of as an underutilized perk. Even in PvE, it typically gets ruled out by a lot of the other reload-based or magazine-based perks in Column 3. Alloy Mag, again, not quite sure. I wouldn't say underutilized, but again, it's probably just there's better stuff there, but interesting. And then Master of Arms, and of course, plus more. So very, very interested to see buffs to all of those. I think Iron Banner perks, really just wider Crucible gains would be nice. I mean, I know they work in the wider Crucible, of course, but yeah, I don't know if the penalties need to get negated. I'm not even sure if that would be enough, or the benefits need to be increased for the current penalties. It's just they appear in such a limited set, and there's always been other perks, that on those guns that I would chase for PvP. Slideways, though, what are you guys' thoughts on Slideways?
It's always just been like slide shot sideways, like, Daniel, the cooler Daniel over here. It's just never really had a chance. So I'm happy for it. And same thing for Master of Arms. Just landed like a whimper when it came back on Recluse. And I get why they didn't want to go crazy with it. It dominated like a year of the game. And same thing for Iron Banner perks. It's just something that would be a turn up, maybe an okay weapon to like an instant shard, because the stat negations were so harsh on some of these things that you were putting your range to the range floor, right? Or you're handling in the dirt or whatever the case may be. So yeah, really, really happy about all these.
Yeah, Slideways was a very curious one. That was the one that it perked my ears up a little bit, just kind of looking at that. Like, I don't know, because it's maybe not performing as well with other weapons, but when I think of Slideways, I'm thinking of Apex Predator and how you can use that. It's a bit of a weird mini game when you're sliding around to reload Apex Predator, but it works because 15% of the magazine for Apex Predator is going to be +1 because it always rounds up. So yeah, that was a curious one. I'm just curious what it will do, because it's the alternate twin to slide shot. So just curious, maybe they'll differentiate Slideways to be a little bit different, because right now it's got very similar triggers compared to slide shot compared to Slideways. I think Master of Arms.
Is Slideways the one with the cooldown though?
I need to double check.
One of them has it, and I think
yeah.
it's Waze, isn't it? Yeah. Is that what is it? Is it 3 seconds?
Yeah, you can negate it by swapping off and back to the weapon, though.
Okay.
It's been the historic way to.
Yeah, so slide shot, you have that tiny 0.3 seconds cooldown after activation, so you can't keep sliding. I think that's the way. Slideways is where it has a duration where you get X amount of stability and X amount of handling, but that also counts as a cooldown, which is 3 seconds. But yeah, as Saint said, you can remove that just by stowing the weapon or swapping out of it. But yeah, very, very similar perks. So maybe that's why they're going for one of them. They're just going to make it. They're differentiating one of them to be completely different, which I'm fine with. Like, I think we don't need two very similar perks in the game. And because it is funny, because we have slide shot in. We've got slide shot on Crux Termination, but Slideways on Apex Predator. So it's just a bit strange to have two very close. Both those rockets came out in the same season. So, sorry, not the same season, but very close seasons.
Yeah.
Slide shot and Slideways. But yeah, Master of Arms definitely needed a little buff. I was in agreement with the sort of general community. I think it came out quite weak. 15% damage buff. Very easy to do, very easy to perform, and obviously it's been nerfed from its previous big buff on the OG Recluse. But yeah, just nature of power creep. I think it needs a little bit extra. Even if they're going to keep 15%, I think they could do with a little bit more added to it. I'm not sure what they could do, but yeah, definitely requires a little buff. And yeah, the rest I'm fine with. We recommend Ally Mag quite a lot. So again, that was another one that I was just like, that's interesting. But yeah, some interesting perks to be buff plus more. That's twice I've seen that. Can't wait for plus more's buff.
The double buff. And of course, we got armor updates. They did specifically say they are going to be providing some updates to underperforming perks on the exotic class items, particularly for Titans. They went so far as to make that specification. Again, we'll be covering the exotic class items later in this episode, so if that's coming as a surprise to you as maybe somebody who doesn't play Titan, well, don't worry. Saint is going to walk you through quite delicately all of the wonderful things you can do with the exotic class item for Titans. And then additionally, we did get, again, another similar wording here, buffs and reworks to underused exotic armor, and they specifically named Blight Ranger, Mask of the Quiet One, Skull of Dire Ahamkara, plus smaller tweaks to other exotic armor to provide meaningful utility boosts. Blight Ranger mentioned. Mask of the Quiet One mentioned.
Yes, yeah. That's the one I'm Blight
Skull
Ranger,
Dire Ahamkara, still in the game.
It is an exotic in this game. It sure is. Blight Ranger, man. Yeah, I don't know what they can do with that. I've just been thinking the last couple of days, like, what really could they do to Blight Ranger? And I just keep thinking, like, they have done it in the past, although it was in the same slot with Full Tracer and the other helmet that's name escapes me.
Knucklehead.
Knucklehead, thank you. They combined both of them into one, where Knucklehead got Full Tracer's old effects, and then they just reworked Full Tracer. And I think Full Tracer right now, the reworked version, really great exotic. If you play into its strengths, then you're going to do really well. And it's one of the exotic class item perks as well. Blight Ranger, I think they could do the same with Raiju's Harness, but again, I'm not sure how that's going to work if they plan to do that. It's different slots. One's a helmet, one's a chest. I could see them combining both of those exotics into one, buffing some kind of other effects to it, because they're both arc staff buffs. But realistically, I'm not sure if that can happen with it just being on different slots. And then what would they do with the extra exotic? I think they're going to maybe add some the new arc exotic for hunters that I have been using a lot. I haven't actually. Storm's Edge, I think they're going to add some synergy to that.
Oh, please no.
Ranger.
Oh, dear God, no.
No,
not bust to Storm's Edge. No, please.
Much to the disgruntlements from the PvP side of this podcast. Yeah, it just needs a lot of work, and I'm not sure what they can do to it. So I don't want to get too excited. I want to really ramp up the anticipation on this one. But I hope they do something with it, because it came out and it was like, on paper, it's got some interesting it's got some interesting aspects to it, but in practice it just doesn't work. So if you're not familiar, while you're in your Arc Staff super, it's only Arc Staff. Blocking doesn't consume any extra super energy. Reflected projectiles deal 400% increased damage, and you generate orbs of power that grant quite a high super energy for your allies. It's 7.14%, which is massive in terms of like super generation. But again, in practice, it just doesn't quite work. It's not a practical exotic. That 400% increased damage to the reflected projectiles sounds quite a lot, but the reflected projectiles, they've got some weird scaling, and there's just not a lot of damage. So yeah.
Could it be where you absorb the damage, and then when you come out of guarding your arc staff, then it becomes supercharged for like the remainder of the super?
That could be a good idea, but then that's kind of tapping into Raiden Flux's effect. It might cross over with Raiden Flux. So do you mean when the projectiles you absorb, and then with your arc staff, you're dealing that like increased damage with them? Is that what you mean?
Yeah. Yeah, so it's not that you're reflecting. You don't have to play that game of I'm reflecting the damage back, but any damage, not even projectile damage, like any damage that you block while you're guarding with the arc staff, then becomes a damage buff for the arc staff. So you have to then play a little mini game of I need to dodge, or sorry, not dodge. I need to guard for a certain portion of my super's duration so that the remaining duration is supercharged.
Yeah, I get you. So, yeah, again, I still think that maybe taps into Raid and Flux. I mean, I'm just not impressed with like Arc Staff exotics overall. So I don't want more overlap than what there already is currently. It's a good idea. Nice, like, kind of Omega burst damage, just with like the nature of reflecting and doing that kind of mini game. But I think Raid and Flux still kind of does that anyway, where you just do the more damage you do, the more hits you perform with Arc Staff, the more damage you do. So if they were to go down that route, Impetus, I think I would be quite happy. I would definitely give it a try out compared to what its current effects are. But
I think the other thing too is like between Blight Ranger and Raid and Flux, I would love to see one of those do something for Gathering Storm because we don't have a super exotic for that. That's kind of where I'm leaning towards with my idea for Blight Ranger. If they don't want to give that to Blight Ranger, then do something with Gathering Storm out of the two of those, you know?
Yep, absolutely agree with that. Again, I would love to see some more consolidation. If it means like, okay, so Raid and Flux and Raiju's Harness share the same slot. If Raid and Flux just got all of those effects from Raiju's Harness, and then Raiju's can be like the new Gathering Storm exotic, then I'd be fine with that. But they haven't mentioned Raiju's Harness, so I don't want to go down that particular rabbit hole. But yeah, I want to give this a fair shot. I know Blight Ranger's been a big meme. I think it's one of the least used exotics, just from talking to other classes. I think speaking to these lads, I think they'd probably be in agreement that Blight Ranger is just one of the, I don't want to say worst, I don't want to be too negative, but it's just one of those exotics that came out dead on arrival, which very unfortunate. But yeah, we will see. All right, Saint. This to be honest, I've been talking about Blight Ranger a lot, but I am looking forward to something that's going to happen to Mask of the Quiet One. Take it away.
It could do anything. It could actually just do what it does right now. With, just increase that effect like 3 times, and even that, I'm okay with. I'm hoping it's a more than just a buff, though, and it is one of the ones that is going to get a full-on rework. It's just been kind of sitting on the back of the bus waiting for its turn for a really long time now. And I mean, I'm already getting really something good here with the updates to underperforming perks and the exotic class items. I'll talk more about that in a moment. But yeah, I think it's going to be Titans eating good when we're coming into this. And yeah, as far as the Blight Ranger stuff, all the arc stuff, I mean, they could do anything there, and it would be, to your point of like just a little more meaningful, maybe a little more uptime on like the effect that it has. Anything like that would be solid.
Folks have been saying like they add Devour to it. Would that be something you'd be interested in? Because it plays into the whole. So I think we spoke to Rodney way back when he was the armor design lead, and they want to keep that idea, the lore attached to these exotics, which is fair enough. Mm-hmm. And specifically for Mask of the Quiet One, it dives into the whole aspect of like healing yourself while you're at critical health. So I think what people are kind of taking that from is you get Devour instead of what you get right now.
If you get a kill while at critical.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm so in on that.
Because right now we don't have a lot of Devour things. Like there's only in the game like 5 things that give you Devour. And it's mostly Warlocks that have access to that.
That's what I was going to say.
God, if Titans got Devour through Mask of the Quiet One, I'd lose my shit.
Yeah, it would be... I think
there would be a little bit more of a mini game attached to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that on Solar Titan? Holy hell!
I think
I can't imagine that. Now that you mentioned it, I can.
know you can.
And it's looking good up there in my head.
I think I was kind of wishing this would get some synergy with the new Twilight Arsenal, the new exotic, the new super. I think much like hunters with their super, they just need, with both their arc supers, they need some exotic that kind of amplifies its effects. So this being kind of you use it for all of your you can use it on all your subclasses, but I think the idea with this is it kind of pivots a little bit towards void, but it's not technically a void exotic.
Yeah, it's gonna be a great day. That first day of episode 2, when we figure out what happened to Prospector and Bad Juju and Huckleberry and Mask of the Quiet One, all this stuff. All right, let's start talking about Prismatic.
Hold on. Let's hear from Imtus and Skull. We haven't.
Oh, that's true.
Talked
That's
about
true.
Skull.
I'm gonna cut you off there.
The bar is in hell.
Could it be
Just
Sorry,
damage
even we
resistance
forgot Skull.
during Nova Bombcast? Holy moly, that is so adorable and not helpful at all. Again, much like Mask of the Quiet One, they can do really anything, and it will be a buff. So. But also on a more serious note, Nova Bomb, both variants, they've been slowly inching them up the chain of good damage, good burst damage. So I hope that they have the supers where they're at right now. You know, speaking from Bungie's point of view, they have the supers kind of at the threshold that they want. And then we've got a revamped Skull of Dire Ahamkara coming in to really push probably Cataclysm into the true meta tier for a Warlock equivalent of really wonderful burst damage. So again, I don't know if that's the case. That's my hope. But yeah, it certainly seems like that's what they're building towards with these small incremental buffs to the Nova Bomb variants. Here's hoping Skull of Dire Ahamkara can kind of push them over the finish line, so to speak.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that because I've always been a fond Nova Bomb enjoyer. And back when when there was no cap to super energy, you could effectively keep spamming your Nova Bombs, but that was a different sandbox, a different time. But
yeah, they could drop that part. I don't think anyone's going to care, but the damage resistance during
Yeah.
Supercast is, I mean, just not it cheap. All right, let's get into Prismatic. Again, there were going to be other exotic armors getting, quote, meaningful utility boosts. I think that's actually been a really consistent goal or design space for the last few waves of exotics that have been getting those utility boosts. So I feel quite confident in those. But yeah, for the 3 that we've just talked about, it's like, man, what are you going to do to really salvage those?
Yeah. All right. So Prismatic Builds. We're quite a few into the episode, so I think I don't have much to really share in regards to Hunter. I've got 2 that I'd like to share. But I think one of them has definitely been advertised quite well amongst the Destiny community. And then we'll give some, we'll go through Hunter, Titan, and Warlock as usual, and then we'll give our kind of generalized thoughts in regards to Prismatic. So yeah, Hunter. So first one, and this is the one that people have been using quite a lot. So my spin with this is Deadfall Tether as a super, grapple melee for the grenade. Melee has combination blow, and the class ability is Gambler's Dodge. The exotic armor, obviously, we're actually going to use the exotic class item with Caliban and Lyres. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And for an exotic weapon, it's not necessary, but Buried Bloodline will really help you to kind of kickstart Devour for close quarter engagements, which is what this build's all about. We have the aspects of Winter Shroud and Stylish Executioner, and as a reminder, Stylish Executioner on Prismatic applies to any effect, not just void effects. It's not just your weaken, suppression, volatility. It applies to any effect across the entire sandbox, which is kind of wild. So like what we're kind of pivoting into this is that Winter Shroud will apply slow, which will synergize with Stylish Executioner. For the facets, we've got Blessing, which is actually one that I may swap out. Just bring this up here. So yeah, Blessing is the melee kills begin health regen. Maybe not too, it's not required. I think this is one of the last facets that I did choose. And you get the effect applies to allies while you're transcendent as well. Protection is the must-have because you get that 50% DR while you're close to 3 or more enemies within 50 meters. Dawn is our powered melee hits, which also applies to grapple melee. Grants radiant for 4 seconds, and kills grants radiant for 4 seconds to you and your allies within a few meters. Ruin is the ignition, having increased radius. Again, this is one of the ones that you could swap out just because it's not terribly important. And then finally, we've got Courage as one of the facets. So light abilities deal 10% increased damage to enemies affected by stasis or strand elemental debuffs. So the grapple melee will synergize with your combination blow there, which is kind of what we're going for. Liar's Handshake plus combination blow to get the melee damage ramped up. Specific mods, you've got hands-on and helm. Arms, you can go for impact, induction, heavy-handed. Chest, we've got resist and reserves, whatever you're required. And then everything else, legs and class item, it's up to you what you want to go down. Specific weapons, again, I haven't really listed anything here. Buried Bloodline, again, it's not something you definitely need, but just use your kind of favorite, ideally close range weapons like shotguns and fusion rifles. So yeah, grapple melee will also count for Caliban's hands, the exotic armor perk. So you've got two sources of Caliban's hand working for you, and it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun. The one thing I will note, I think a lot of builds have talked about this build. They haven't kind of put that asterisk of you need to be dodging as soon as you've meleeed someone and you're still close to some enemies. You need to dodge ASAP to get your combination blow back, because that ignition can clear the room and you will not get your combination blow back with the dodge. It can be a little bit tricky just to kind of really have that in the back of your head to remind yourself to immediately dodge to get your combination blow back. Otherwise, you're going to be. It's not a terribly long cooldown for combination blow, but it does interrupt that nice clean like dodge into Liar's Handshake melee, dodge again, and watch the ignition explode. It's a lot of fun. For me personally, while it is a lot of fun, it can be a little bit boring, just with the nature of it's quite easy to do. It's there's not much to it. You just dodge Caliban's plus Liar's Handshake melee and then dodge again. It can be fun in low-end content and high-end content, but for me, I'm not particularly into the hunter melee subclass builds. Something that I have been using quite a lot, especially if you've seen me in your raid team or other kind of high-end content, it's the Still Hunt Celestial Nighthawk, and this is on Prismatic. So this is your DPS and damage builds. So Marksman Golden Gun for your super magnetic grenade, Thready Spike for melee, Gambler's Dodge for class ability, Celestial Nighthawk, and Still Hunt as your exotics. Aspects, Ascension, Gunpowder Gamble. Again, Gunpowder Gamble is one of those that works across the board. It's not confined to just solar effects. So if you do your let's see here. Yes, so it's triggered by, well, everything, including solar weapon kills, your Suspend, Unravel, Slow, Suppression, Scorch, Jolt. And the reason why we've got Ascension there, it's such a easy on-demand jolt for Gunpowder Gamble. So you'll have your Gunpowder Gamble up all the time as long as you're producing those effects. It's very noticeable with Thready Spike, just with the nature of Thready Spike applying the effect of severing. So that'll go towards your Gunpowder Gamble. We've got facets of balance here, and that is your so killing 3 or more enemies within a few seconds of each will grant 10% melee if it's light damage that you performed that, and it's grenade energy if it's dark. So quite an easy one to get your your effects back up, your magnetic and thready spike up. Hope, we have it grants faster class ability regen rate while affected by an elemental buff. There's I'm not sure if this is fixed yet, but there is a little bit of a bug with the arc effect. The name escapes me. Amplified, sorry. Amplified, I think, is still bugged with Facet of Hope, as far as I'm aware. Or at least there's some weirdness with it. I think Bungie are aware of it, but I haven't seen if it's been fixed yet or if they've tweaked around with it. But yeah, anyway, essentially it allows you to get your Ascension back faster. So that's a nice one to kind of self-sustain your Gunpowder Gamble build with the rest of your subclass. We've got Dominance, which is your, let's see here. Yeah, so your Void Grenade ability damage applies weakens, so that's why we've got Magnetic there. And there's no arc damage, so you're not getting that jolt. So Magnetic is the only Void Grenade that hunters have access to. It's actually, I've been using it a fair amount in PvE, and I am enjoying it. It's obviously no Vortex, but it does some good damage, and it's a way to get our weaken, which is part of the build. If you're kind of doing a solo kind of style build, that's one way to get your weaken. 3 more here. We've got Purpose, which is Orbital Power grants an elemental buff on pickup based on your equipped super. So for us, it's we're going to get Restoration for 5 seconds. Courage, which is light abilities deal 10% damage to enemies affected by stasis or strand elemental debuffs. So again, Thready Spike is going to apply Sever, so you're going to get 10% on top of your light abilities, which will include Celestial Nighthawk and the Still Hunt super. And then finally, we've got Dawn, which is the way you get your Radiance, as I mentioned earlier. Again, your specific mod's not terribly important. I went for Hands-On, Ashes to Assets, and your Siphons for Helmet. Siphons just the way to get your Surges with your legs. Arms, you've got Firepower and Heavy-Handed. Again, it's just ways to get your surge stacks up, and then obviously you've got resistant reserves. And ideally you want to go for Solar Heavy. I've been using Apex Predator in the heavy slot, just so you can synergize with your surges. And yeah, I've been using this as your DPS and kind of damage builds. Still Hunt got that warranted nerf a few weeks back, but still has excellent damage output. And of course, Still Hunt and Seahawk can be used on Solar subclass specifically, and I do that, but you do have Courage here, which is the one that gives you extra damage buff by applying a elemental darkness debuff on enemies, which is what Thready Spike's there for. You've got Magnetic with Weaken, you've got your Surges, you've got Radiant, and that's where, you know, all these hyper kind of damage stacking comes into play. So that's my 2 here. I'm still tweaking around with a few. I think I had a Stasis one, but Stasis specifically, I've been having more fun just on Stasis. And I don't have one for the other exotics, not for the Strand exotic or the new Arc is exotic. Maybe post one in the future. But I've personally been having a lot of fun with these 2. All right, Saint, what are our Titan options for Prismatic?
So, first one off the bat, it's just a few different variations of what I think I would refer to as like the default Prismatic Titan build. It's the kind of definitely the meta of like where the subclass has gone. And there's pretty good reason for that. The core of it is stacking Knockout with Consecration and Frenzied Blade, right? You get all the benefits from Knockout with your Consecration. Frenzied Blade gives you 3 charges. You use your Shackle Grenade, usually suspending targets to trigger that light abilities dealing bonus damage to darkness debuff targets that Court was just talking about with hunters and your threaded spike there. Except this time we were using Shackle Grenade because it just works really well for that combination of stringing people up and then bringing down the Consecration Ignition on them. There's a few different ways that you can work this loadout as far as it comes to like the finer tuning details, and I've messed around with so many different versions of this so far this episode since Final Shape came out. Really, just because it is so good and you want to mix it up a little bit. And, there's a few ways to do that. There are a few other fragments that are going to be pretty important. I would say Ruin is really nice for this. It increases the size and damage of burst when you shatter a stasis crystal or the area effect of your solar ignitions. Really solid. You pair that with some of our current artifact mods, especially Solar Fulmination. It's really just going to crank that up even further, which is great. I am also a fan of using stuff like Sacrifice and Balance, for the Arc Solar and Void ability. Final Blows grant bonus darkness, transcendent energy when you have a buff of that type, which is pretty easy to have with like Radiant Orbs and all the other stuff going on this season. And then Faceted Balance is rapidly defeating light targets, right? There's melee and darkness granting grenade energy. Again, another one from a build that Court was just talking about. And there's, I think, a couple ways to go in the end. Protection is also really nice because you're going to be using your melee so much. But you could also go with something like Grace, and that is going to increase the amount of Transcendence energy you are getting from getting kills with your kinetic weapons. And that brings me to okay, this is kind of the core of the build that has seen a bunch of iterations. What are the iterations going through? It started off using, something just like Hazardous Propulsion with a dash, just because I knew I would have supporting damage when I could suspend targets. But I later on moved to using Synthos, and then eventually an exotic class item. So this is honestly a build that is so strong that, if you even just have a decent pair of Synthos, you can throw them on and you'll be, just cranking out massively damaging ignitions, and it'll be great. As far as the weapons go, something like Grace, where you want to just really amplify the amount of Transcendence energy that you're getting. Outbreak Perfected and like Kvostov are both very good. And then I would say, after that, I use Buried Bloodline a lot because of the ability flow that it allows me to have using some of the armor mods that I have on and all that stuff. But a lot of options there. And I have even used this with a Risk Runner Ergo Sum, which we'll talk about why that is so good a little bit later on. But for now, I'm going to talk about one other build. It's a little more interesting, a little less common, I would say. And that is kind of a more void-focused subclass build within Prismatic. So taking Twilight Arsenal, Suppressor Grenades, and Shield Throw for our ability. So a lot of void there. And then for our exotic armor, we're going to be taking Second Chance. Happy to say is actually definitely a viable thing to do these days. And I think some people still think that Second Chance is bad. And then Collective Obligation as our weapon. And the synergy that we're getting here that is so good is because your shield throws are able to weaken targets, right? And then your Collective Obligation is able to absorb that weaken and then kind of keep that going, right, from target to target as you go around to different engagements or whatever it may be. It's just really strong. Plus, they can counter barrier champions. A little redundant right now, since your Pulse Rifle Collective Obligation that you want to use this is also barrier at the moment, but I think in future episodes this could continue to be very viable. And Collective Obligation also feeling pretty good since all those Pulse Rifle changes. So a lot coming together here to make this like a pretty potent build. And there are a few other things that we can do that are going to just continue to ratchet this up a little bit in the effect that we're going to have on it. So if we take Facet of Bravery as well, you're getting volatile rounds on grenade final blows to your weapons, which you can then also chain through Collective Obligation. And then we also have Dominance, which allows your void grenades to weaken targets. And that is also something that we can leech with our Collective Obligation. So this build has a way to give us all three of the void debuffs that you can put on targets and then just keep them going from room to room. It's really pretty nice. The lacking part here is that the aspects, you can take Drinker's Lash and Diamond Lance, which are great, defensive stuff and all that, but they just don't play super well into this loop. And I think that says a lot because this is still quite effective in, even in GM content, despite the fact that you're the two aspects that you have are just giving you 3 energy. They come into play a little bit when you get into closer scenarios, for sure. Rally, or you're casting your barricade and having Drinker's Lash there is really nice. But without, your boots or Bayant Leap, or something like that to give you Woven Mail when that happens, it's just not super valuable. And then Diamond Lance, if you can close the gap from where you killed something with a shield throw, because shield throw is actually does decent damage these days. You can get up there and make some good utility out of that. But yeah, incredibly potent Void build. If you don't have Collective Obligation, I would highly recommend farming for it whenever that raid is up in the rotator. And you probably have a pair of second chance gauntlets, or at least they're unlocked in your collections, maybe collecting some dust. But, take them out, dust them off, give them a chance. And, something I mentioned just there was a Bayant Leap. And I'll just say for a brief moment that leaning in with like Shackle Grenades and Drinker's Lash and Blade Fury is a super, faceted purpose, can give you Woven Mail. There is something there to be said for running like a strand-focused-ish kit, like a very defensive kit on Prismatic Titan, because you can also run stuff like Protection. It's just like a little too defensive and not quite offensive enough for me, but there is something there. All right, that's all I got for Titan Prismatic. Impetus. How's it looking for the Warlock?
Well, I've got the build that you've already heard of, and then I've got the build that probably, maybe you've heard of it, maybe you haven't. But let's talk about the Getaway Artist build that's been taken over Prismatic Warlock. On the super side of things, we could do Song of Flame. You could do Needle Storm. I think those are the 2 strongest supers that we currently have on Prismatic. Needle Storm very much the burst option, Song of Flame for that total damage, and also probably the better play for any solo activities that you might be doing. On the grenade front here, you can pick whatever you want. I've personally gone for Storm. Again, the idea here is that you'll be consuming that grenade to get the Sentient Arc Soul and then also that Bleak Watcher turret. So really what we're picking here is what's a good backup option in case we need to dispel enemies for a reason that our Sentient Arc Soul can't quickly take care of, but also the Bleak Watcher can't freeze quick enough. What's our damage option there? And so I've landed on Storm Grenade for that, and there is a facet that I'll talk about that leans into it. I think a Vortex Grenade could also work as well. Really, either of those 2 would be fine. You do not need Cold Snap Grenades. Again, we're going to lean into quite a few things here to take care of ad clear. Cold Snap doesn't kill the enemies, it just prevents the immediate ones, of course, from shooting you. And we're looking for kind of a backup option. We want something that doesn't have utility, that just has damage, because we're going to be getting utility from our primary use of the grenade. So again, I think Vortex or Storm would be fine. I have Storm personally, that's the one that I use. Melee, again, we want a damage option here. I'm going Arcane Needle. This is how I will be bringing some darkness-related abilities to the kit, and I'll explain that a little bit more when I get down to the facets. Class ability, I am a Phoenix Dive stan. I am so sick and tired of standing in a rift. I would happily take a healing mobile class ability option on Warlock. I think that is the superior option. So that is what I go for. But again, if you really do like a Rift, I think Healing Rift makes the most sense here. Empowering Rift just doesn't really bring anything to the table for the Prismatic kit outside of one very specific perk on the exotic class item. For the exotic armor, it's not the class item. It is Getaway Artists, yes, to the surprise of everyone. But we are going to use Getaway Artist, and the reason we're using Getaway Artist really is for the aspects that we're going to be rocking here. Feed the Void for Devour. I don't think I need to explain that too much. That is the strongest verb, very, very powerful for both health and ability regeneration. And then Bleak Watcher, we want those turrets. And the reason we want our turrets is when we consume our grenade, number one, that Bleak Watcher turret will spawn pretty close to you. I'd say within about 5 feet, maybe even 5 meters, I guess, depending on if you're in the air or not. But then we also get that Sentient Arc Soul from Getaway Artist. So right away, what we're getting is a source of light energy, and then a source of darkness energy for transcendence. Really why this build is so phenomenal for ad clear is number one, we're getting the Sentient Arc Soul to provide a damage burst and a small amount of grenade regeneration. We're also getting Amplify, which is very strong with our current artifact mod, the Galvanic Armor, where when you're amplified, you do get extra damage resistance. That is going to be very easy to maintain throughout the course of an activity with this build, so that is a particularly meta pick right now, but Amplify also just lets us move around the field a lot faster, as well as a few other buffs. But we're also getting the Stasis Turret providing darkness energy and locking targets down and afflicting them with slow, which is very nice. It slows enemies, and then the Arc Soul basically guns them down. And that's just our ability kit, right? We're not even factoring in weapons at this point. So you can really leave a group of enemies alone and let your Arc Soul and the turret take care of them while you're focusing on a different group of enemies with your weapons. Now, how to tie it all together, it comes down to our facets. And there's 4 of them that I think of kind of as a group here that will really help us supercharge our ability regeneration. First one here, Sacrifice, Arc/Solar/Void buff, ability Final Blows, grant bonus darkness energy. This is the Arc Soul helping us out here. Again, we could also use our Storm Grenade if we wanted to instead of consuming it. Sacrifice also coming with that plus 10 discipline. Very, very nice. And then our follow-up, our counterpart to Sacrifice is Devotion, where defeating targets afflicted with stasis or strand debuffs grants bonus light energy with a plus 10 strength to boot. So where are the stasis and strand debuffs coming from? Bleak Watcher is slowing enemies. That's our stasis debuff. Arcane Needle is also unraveling enemies, and we have 3 charges of that. So we're also getting a strand debuff in the kit as well, and that's also getting helped a little bit by the plus 10 to our strength from the facet of Devotion. So those 2 are kind of our pair. We then start to bring those 2 together even further with the facet of Balance, where defeats with light damage grant melee energy, and defeats with darkness damage grant grenade energy. Light damage defeats, again, you'll be seeing this either from your grenade choice or the Sentient Arc Soul. Defeats with darkness energy, probably not happening with Bleak Watcher, which is why I've gone back to Arcane Needle over something like Incinerator Snap for the melee of choice, because you can, with those 3 charges, weaken an enemy with a weapon, then get that defeat for the darkness damage to get even more grenade energy on top of the Sentient Arc Soul buff from Getaway Artist and on top of Devour. And then further, we take it one step more. Awakening defeats targets with light or darkness damage, and that includes the super, generates an elemental pickup of your super damage type. So that is going to really help with getting, not super damage type, just of the damage type. So we're looking at Ionic Traces. Again, if you're really lucky, you get maybe a Stasis Shard from your Bleak Watcher that will provide melee energy. The Ionic Trace just providing a small amount of ability energy for all your abilities. And then if you want to get a kill with the Arcane Needle, you might possibly get a Tangle to spawn. Awakening does also give you plus 10 to your Resilience, one of the more desirable stats. So really those 4 facets, Sacrifice, Devotion, Balance, and Awakening, those are going to be the engine for your Getaway Artist, Bleak Watcher, Feed the Void machine right there. That they're going to keep that whole thing trucking along. It's a pretty straightforward build. I'm sure you've probably seen clips of this. Every content creator that I know has jumped on this build. It really is the best ad clear build in the game. It's very straightforward for what you need to do. We do have one more facet here available. Again, Feed the Void, it gives us a plus 2 for our fragment cost, and then Bleak Watcher brings a plus 3. I've given 2 options here. I personally run Dominance, where Void Grenades weaken and Arc Grenades jolt. That comes with a Malice of minus 10 discipline. The Void Grenades weaken is the important part here. That does apply to the Transcendent Grenade. We did actually test this before we started recording here. So the Void aspect of our Transcendent Grenade is modified by the facet of Dominance. It does weaken, which can be very helpful. Again, if you wanted to choose a Vortex Grenade for your grenade option, you could also have that in your back pocket. But again, I'm running Storm, so I get the Arc Grenade's Jolt part of that, which does not apply to my Transcendent Grenade. The choice is yours if you would, which side of it you want to run. If you want to double dip on the Void side and get the Transcendent Grenade to weaken as well as the Vortex, I can totally understand that. I'm more interested in the jolting and my backup option of just casting the regular Storm Grenade. The other final fragment we could run would be Courage, which is your Arc Solar Void abilities deal increased damage to targets afflicted by the darkness debuffs. Again, that provides another +10 to your discipline. Pretty straightforward. I've already explained why that's pretty simple to get going with your fragment of devotion, the facet of devotion. You've got 2 different sources of darkness debuffs. We can apply slow from the turret. We can also apply unravel from Arcane Needle melee. I think that's going to be really, really solid here. And again, it is such a simple build. It's a silly build. Again, consuming the grenade, your little sentient arc soul pops up, and then also your turret pops up at the same time. I'm not sure how they're going to nerf it. This has already been touched a little bit. In reality, what has happened is that you need 1 more kill, really, to get a full grenade back. It used to be about 4 kills to get a full grenade from your abilities. Now it's about 5 when Devour's procced. But yeah, this is a very simple... I can't believe it works, but watching it in action, it takes care of pretty much everything you need to do for ad clear. Really, what you're doing is building Transcendence like crazy that you can then use for supercharged ad clear in like a GM environment, or you could cast it to deal with mini bosses or bosses. But more importantly, that's what the super's there for. So if you wanted to run Needle Storm and just save it for a boss whenever that shows up in what activity you're running, perfect. I think from most of the cases, Transcendence will take care of any mini bosses that might be around, but you could also pop your super to quickly clear out a few mini bosses if they show up as well. Mod side of things, I would just generate as many orbs of power as possible through your arms. Again, if you also want to generate more orbs to get more supers quickly on your helm with a Siphon mod, I think that works as well. But Firepower is probably going to be one of the better options here. Really, yeah, there's not a need to have mod set here. You could really go all out and go Bomber on your class item. That's what I have, just because I love throwing grenades as a Warlock. I think that makes the most sense, but you are going to get grenades crazy quickly here, and this build does work at pretty much every difficulty level. So there it is. There's Getaway. You've already heard about this if you're a Warlock main. I'm not really talking about anything new here. The other build that I'm talking about, you probably have heard of it. It is the class item version here, and this is more for how we deal high damage on Prismatic. Really what we want to do for single target burst damage, and this will be against bosses and mini bosses. I'm thinking more of a dungeon or a raid environment. We're going to be using Needle Storm for our super, again, really leaning on burst damage. I'm picking Vortex Grenade specifically here with Arcane Needle as my melee. Again, on class ability, if you are going to be using this in a team environment, I think Healing Rift has some real value there. But if you are trying to use this for like a solo dungeon, Phoenix Dive makes the most sense for just a quick get out of dodge and also heal yourself at the same time. For the class item exotic armor, we're running Apotheosis and Star Eater, those 2 spirits there for kind of help on getting to the damage super quicker, but then also getting supercharged abilities after the super has been cast. Vortex, I think, is the best grenade to really take advantage of that Apotheosis blast afterwards. You could do Storm if you wanted to here, but I think Vortex, again, with the suck effect, does lock down enemies for the follow-ups a lot easier than a Storm grenade, which doesn't have any sucking effect, and a more mobile boss might be able to move out of it, or, mini boss might be able to move out of that area of effect of Storm grenade, and thus you have to kind of track them or chase them with your follow-up abilities. So I lean Vortex just for the few enemies that I can keep sucked, and then keep applying damage ticks to them. Aspects, Feed the Void, and then here we don't need Bleak Watcher. I'd rather go Hellion, actually, for that passive damage. Hellion does fantastic passive damage, applies great Scorch stacks, really leans into those passive ignitions that you can build up, which is really, really solid. This works, of course, outside of the damage phase. If you're clearing ads as you're building up towards that damage phase, it's fantastic. It's also great during the damage phase. On our facets, I've got Hope, where elemental buffs regenerate class ability faster here. And that would be Devour helping out here. Again, we want to get to the class ability faster because that's our Phoenix Dive. That's going to be very helpful. Or our Healing Rift if you're in a team environment. Awakening, defeating targets with light or darkness damage super generates the elemental pickup of that damage type for the extra 10 to resilience. But again, dealing damage with light, in this case our Hellion, is going to be helpful for getting those fire sprites to appear, which will be very solid. Vortex, you can also get your void sprites as well. They're not called void sprites. What are they called? The void elemental pickup.
Void breaches.
Breaches, thank you. And then we have Facet of Dominance, again, for the Void Grenade to weaken. Very helpful here. Specifically, that part of it, we're not going to be using Arc Grenades to jolt here. Mending. Grenade Final Blows give Cure ×1, and the Transcendent Grenade kills give Cure ×2. Again, thinking about this once the Apotheosis part of our exotic class item takes effect, when you can start really throwing out a lot of Vortex Grenades. But again, with Devour from Feed the Void, you'll still be getting pretty consistent stream of grenades from Vortex Grenades, but a little bit of healing for it yourself if you need to be on Rift, and that's more for your team, and you're moving around and can't be standing in the Rift as much. And then our final facet here, Purpose, picking up an Orb of Power grants Restoration, it picks up a number of different things, but depending on what super you want to run, in this case, I think Song of Flame or Needlestorm, then Purpose will be providing either Restoration or Woven Mail based on the element of your super whenever you pick up an Orb of Power. That does come with a Malice of a 10 from your recovery stat. I think that's fine, given that we're going to be running a Devour to give a little bit of health here, but Restoration or Woven Mail on top of that will be nice. Again, I'm imagining you'll be using this in a high damage situation, probably a tougher situation, so a little bit of Resto, a little bit of Woven Mail wouldn't hurt anyone. Definitely want to fuel that with a Siphon mod for your Orbs of Power on the helmet. In terms of specific mods, I would also follow up and use Firepower on the arms so that your Vortex Grenades can create Orbs of Power as well to keep that Woven Mail or Restoration up and running. Definitely run Bomber on the class item here. We want to have as many grenades as possible so that we can really take advantage of the Spirit of Apotheosis once that kicks in. Of course, the Orbs of Power will also fuel our Star Eater Spirit as well on the exotic item. Very, very nice, very, very simple build here. Not as flashy or silly as our Getaway Artist build, but if you need something for high health, single target damage, I think this is the Prismatic subclass option for Warlocks. That brings me to the end of those two builds. I think this is kind of the time where we give our discussion and feedback of Prismatic. I know there's a lot to say here, and we still have the class items and Ergo Sum to get into. We know that this is very much a work in progress. Like they've already said they're going to be looking at Prismatic Titans and stuff, so maybe we don't get as deep into this as we could, fellows, but I'll pass you back to Court here. How are you feeling about Prismatic as a whole? How are you feeling about Prismatic Hunter and the concept of Prismatic?
So real quickly, Hunter Prismatic, I think, is performing really well. I think we're all in agreement with that. I'm pretty sad to see that Titan is maybe not quite at the same level. I don't agree with the sentiment that Titan Prismatic's like down and out. Saying obviously you can go into a little bit more detail of that when we get to that. But yeah, Hunter Prismatic is performing really well. I conceptually enjoy it, but in practice, I don't know if I'm just being a little bit of a traditionalist, where I still prefer your mono type builds, your mono subclasses. I mean, Prismatic is the lower accurate Guardian, as people have been describing it, but something I'm not quite sure. Yeah, I think I'll save my like fuller thoughts down the line, because they've made it pretty clear that Prismatic's here to stay, and it's here to be built upon. We'll probably see more supers and grenades and melees and aspects be attached to Prismatic. At this present time, though, I'm just not quite sure about it. I acknowledge that Hunter Prismatic's really strong, it's really fun, it's really good. But I think it's an uncharted waters is where we're heading with Prismatic, and I'm not too sure how to take that. But yeah, I'll go into a little bit more detail further down the line once we've got a little bit more, just to see how things change for me. Saint, I know Titans have been umming and ahhing about Prismatic for Titan. What's your thoughts?
I think that there's just a lot of discrepancy about what people think is not strong enough or too strong when it comes to aspects to give Prismatic. Is like really what a bunch of this comes down to. And it's such a tight line to walk, trying to not just entirely power creep every other native element subclass in the game by giving it too much And I feel for that from like a balance standpoint. I think that Titans could just use one more significantly strong aspect to just pump up the diversity of what they can do outside the perception of, well, Dringer's Lash isn't any good unless I use a Bant Leap to make it good. And if it's taking an exotic piece of armor to make that part of the build good, I don't know if it's that great of a build in the first place, because like going back to the whole Consecration knockout build, you can use 4 different exotics with it, and it's probably going to be fine. That's a strong combo right there. There's also a bit of disappointment around Hammer of Soul in general, and the fact that it did just get a buff, and it's better, but lacking sunspots has been a big point of contention for Titans in general, and that just really hurts that super, and it's gotten a little bit better now. Twilight Arsenal also just got a buff, which can be really strong in this case, and you can also just use that on Native Void, though, and there's still some strong stuff over there, kind of like the build I was talking about just a little bit ago, using a lot of Void-focused stuff. It is nice because you can use other stuff like Solitude to sever targets, or, protection in the mix with that, but at the same time, I just don't think it's a ton, and I think that Titans are one... Soul Invictus, like Sunspots away, or maybe Offensive Bulwark, or I don't know, something like that, or even Into the Fray. It would be cool to see is like something a bit more defensive. Those are all like defensive or kind of balance between offense and defense, not super offensive. And I don't know. I mean, I think that is really what would make Prismatic Titan feel better, is just seeing one more strong, kind of mixed or strong defensive aspect in the mix is what it would take, in my opinion. Could go on about that for a long time, but we'll stop there. That's succinct enough. That's a coherent thought. We can move on a little bit to Impetus. How you feel about Warlocks?
Man, I laugh at Getaway Artists, but using it, I mean, it's just the best option. It's not. It feels very much kind of like the Still Hunt of the Warlock Prismatic builds. Like, why would you not use it? It does everything you need it to do. And it's to the point where I don't even need any more stuff added to the Prismatic kit from our existing stuff. I'd rather just have the existing mono element builds be buffed, right? Like, why am I using an arc exotic armor piece on a non-arc subclass? But it's because the arc subclass for Warlocks is not phenomenal in PvE. That feels wrong to me. I would rather see buffs more for arc. I'd rather see Getaway Artist modified in some ways so that when you're actually running an arc subclass, I know that we don't do that anymore. It's all based on the super, but I'd like to see Getaway Artist become more of a true arc exotic rather than here's a really goofy interaction on Prismatic, because Prismatic it does everything, and that becomes boring after a while. There's really no thought that goes into the build. I press the long button hold on my grenade, button here on my M&K, and the abilities just kind of take care of the rest, and then I shoot my gun whenever I need to for a specific reason. I'm sure for a lot of people, it will be the build that helps them challenge harder content for the first time. Like, it really empowers them, and I'm happy for them, but I'm not at that level. I need a little bit more for my builds, and it does too much, and sure, I could just not run it, but at that point, if I have to not run the best stuff on my class to really challenge myself, that's not my problem. That's a problem with the game and the way that the sandbox is set up, and it's starting to feel like that's where I'm at when it comes to Prismatic Warlock. And any new content that comes out is, why would I not run my Prismatic? Why would I not run Getaway Artist build? And I hope that some tweaks and changes can come down the line for Prismatic Warlock, where more stuff becomes viable, and that we don't have to worry about one exotic suddenly coming out of nowhere and just dominating the entire subclass to the extent that Getaway Artist has done for Prismatic Warlock. Because I do think it's kind of fun. Again, we have a lot of fun aspects. We have a really fun play styles on Warlock. Prismatic does bring it together, but the exotic class items for Warlock just don't hold a candle to what Getaway Artist does, and that is a letdown, in my opinion.
Yeah, some interesting thoughts. I think we should dedicate an episode. This we're talking like kind of like far future stuff. Once we see where Prismatic properly lands, I think the dust is still to settle. But I certainly want to hear these two lads' thoughts about Prismatic conceptually and just where it's landed at whenever in the future. I'm just interested to see where, because there's a lot of fancy tech, there's a lot of fancy stuff, a lot of aspects that have been decoupled from the original element, like Gunpowder Gamble and Stylish Executioner for Solar and Void, respectively. Again, I'm not too sure about them, just how potent they are. But yeah, I think we should revisit this in the future just to give really comprehensive thoughts. But I think we should move over to our second last topic of this episode. And that is our exotic class item perk recommendations. We won't go into too much detail, like specific detail of each spirit. A lot of these are now quite readily accessible in terms of like information. We encourage you to view all those details on the data compendium, which you can find in the show notes via the D2 Spreadsheets link tree. But of course, as always, I will kick us off with Hunters with our first one. And I've already talked about it. It was the Caliban and Liars exotic class item. Caliban and Liars has some fantastic synergy, the best synergy here. And as I already mentioned, Caliban has the synergy with Grapple Melee and whatever melee you're using to cause ignitions. You could use Threaded Spike, as your melee as well, and you can see the cascading ignitions. It's a lot of fun to watch, but I think this is best suited for your combination blow and your Grapple Melee. For our second option here, we have Galanor and Star Ear. Star Ear is the one that you can use on all three subclasses. This is all about supers. So Galanor will apply to all your supers, but it's most potent, or it's best used on, of course, Tether. It kind of works a bit like Orpheus Rig. But it's got some really nice synergy with Stasis Super, Silence and Squall. You won't notice immediately with this being a roaming super, but it will pretty much charge your super up to 50%. It is fun to watch that once the super ends. Still some individual testing required for Galanor across all supers, but I think it's best used with Tether and the Silence and Squall supers. Star Ear is pretty easy. It's just kind of very similar to what we already have with the standard exotic that Hunters have, and at maximum stacks it goes up to 70% increased to super damage, and that applies to all supers again. For our third option here, the third and final one is a little bit more descriptive, and that is on left column, either Renewal or Inmost Light. Again, Inmost Light is one of our general ones that all classes have. Renewal is just Hunter specific, and on our right column, another Hunter specific here is Certarachne. So if you've got Renewal plus Certarachne, you are confined to only use one Dustfield, one grenade, which is Dustfield. But you do get two powerful effects, and that is slowing and freezing with Dustfield, and then obviously the free woven mail for just throwing your Dustfield. Dustfields have a very short cooldown, which can be sped up even more through various effects like Facetive Balance. I mentioned that in one of the Hunter builds. Grenade mods, including Kickstart, Impact Induction, Bomber, Absolution, etc., etc. You've got Demolitionist, and you've also got Tessellation, which is the grenade returns on kills, which has added effects on top of that. You might maybe not want to consume your grenade, just with the fact that it won't work with Certarachne with the Tessellation consumption. But if you do have a spare, if you want to get that effect from Tessellation, obviously you'll apply slow if it's a stasis grenade, and then the various other effects if it's another elemental grenade. With Inmost Light, I think this is a little bit more kind of free, just with the nature you're not confined to Renewal. You've got the choice of Combination Blow, Knife Trick, Grapple, and Swarm Grenade. They all have low cooldowns. Combination Blow and Gambler's Dodge would be the best combo, specifically for Inmost Light, to sustainably keep that fast regen rate up. Obviously, Inmost Light's not as potent as it once was, but now that all 3 classes can get it, I think Hunters have some really great synergy just with the nature of Hunters having short cooldowns. You can keep those stacks of Empowered Light up for all your abilities there. So that's my set here. It's a nice fun set. I think I'm still to get Galanar and Star Eater, so I really want to get that. I think that looks like a fun kind of passive super build, so I'm looking forward to that. All right, Saint, what combos are we looking for Titans?
Yeah, I've got your kind of general one, your DPS one, and then something for fun. Inmost Light and Syntheseps is without a doubt the strongest combo that you could throw on here, especially when you consider the builds we've just been talking about. It's just incredibly good, and the uptime is really high. The effect from both of these things is strong, and you're going to have it activated all the time. I don't even know if I need to say much more about that. It's just ridiculously good, the ability chain you can get going there, and the amount of damage that you're able to do with that whole triple consecration set and a class item like this. Throw in, your dash ability. You've got Inmost Light just absolutely cranking all the time. I haven't been able to land this. I have been able to land Inmost Light plus Armamentarium, which I frequently run in this same build. And I will say is it still very strong. Maybe I would give that like a 9 out of 10 though. And the Inmost and Syntho combos, the true 10 out of 10 here. We also have the ability to compete a little bit when it comes to DPS phases, which is great. If you land a Eternal Warrior plus Star Eater combo on your class item, you can really do some solid DPS here. If you've been a little miffed about the Hunter on your team keeps beating you out on those DPS screens, well, you can fight back a little bit here. 70% increase to your super max stacks on Star Eater, and that also goes on with the buff that Twilight Arsenal just got outright. Quite a lot of damage coming out of that these days. Really strong super there if you're able to charge it up. And then Eternal Warrior, the aspect that we're getting from that in the class item is Weapon Surge times 4, aka 25% for 30 seconds after cast, which, that's pretty much your whole, that's a damage phase, right there. It's very strong. If you're going to be doing it on, Void, there's Void Rockets out there. You've got Edge Transit, Leviathan's Breath, Falling Guillotine for a close range boss, anything like that, or whatever it is, or even your Ergo Sum if you happen to be going with a certain frame that can be used for damage. We'll be talking about in just a moment. And then my kind of fun one, I would say, would be something like Severance plus Contact or Severance plus Syntho, even Inmost Light with Contact. It's just a lot of fun. Contact for that like jolt on your arc melee there is pretty strong. You can be going with that combo where you're suspending things up and then you're bringing in the melee from Contact with something like Inmost to keep the chaining up, or Severance for explosions on those, just kind of tossing things around. It's just really silly. And there's also another kind of silly combo, I would say, of the Drengers plus your Kefri's Horn. Right, you suspend and scorch something at the same time. Unfortunately, neither of those effects are super strong, so it still doesn't feel great, but it is very funny to watch. Just trying to make the most out of like whatever random drops I've got. And then Crucible side, Phidians and Scars, I would say, is probably would be my like go-to combo. But yeah, all your Titan combos there. Some really strong stuff, some fun stuff. Unfortunately, also a lot of not very strong options that I think will get maybe changed or buffed or added or removed in the pool at some point in the future. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. It was just...
Yeah, it's pretty much just going to be Spirit of Apotheosis and Spirit of Star Eater. For the Warlock class item, I think that is probably the most general use one. There's other combos. I know there are other people going for stuff, but I think it's a little bit more gimmicky than useful. And I'm probably going to tick some people off saying that, but yes, I do think, unfortunately, we're we're pretty well covered by both just our general selection of aspects, but then also getaway artists. There's a lot of things on here that I think are on here really for fun, and if you want to go for something specific like Spirit of the Necrotic plus Spirit of the Claw for a more melee prismatic build, unironically, go for it, have fun. It's not of interest to me, and it's not something that's generally useful. It's just a different way to do ad clear, and again, the game is nowhere near challenging enough for me to sit here and say that you're playing the game wrong. So for a lot of these options, if you want to have one different, spirit, one different exotic perk for the same purpose, I will wholeheartedly champion you in that. But for the most part, if you're just looking for a one and done, what should I aim for, if anything, on the Warlock exotic class item? Getting increased melee and grenade regeneration after the super ends from Apotheosis, paired with a hopefully faster, quicker super from Spirit of the Star Eater when we're picking up an Orb of Power to even get better damage from the super is going to be the play there. And again, we can take that a step further. We do have our Pale Heart weapon set with a very helpful what is it called? Is it Dealer's Choice? Dealer's Choice Origin trait. That's what we want there. The final blows with those weapons grant small amounts of super energy. You can really get that going for faster supers. I think if you're going to be running Needle Storm in particular, that's going to be the most beneficial because we have two fantastic strand weapons in that set. One being, of course, the Rocket Sidearm, the Call. The other one being Pro Memoria, that new frame, the aggressive frame machine gun. Those will they're both really for ad clear, so they will mow through enemies. You'll get a lot of super energy from that as well. Again, if it's really fast supers that you're for, I think the better option would be Spirit of Harmony. That's really where those strand weapons would benefit more. Again, you could do that with Apotheosis. But Star Eater boosting the damage of Needle Storm is also an equally valuable effect. So I think those are really it. Everything else is kind of there for fun if you want to go into like a Spirit of the Claw with Spirit of Necrotic, or Spirit of the Assassin with Spirit of the Claw for some more melee shenanigan stuff. Go for it. I'm not particularly interested in that. I'm a Karnstein's addict at this point, so I would rather just put that on Prismatic if I really wanted to go with a melee first option there. I don't necessarily care about chasing a class item to get me something similar. So those are that's my recommendation, really. I think Apotheosis is the best out of that one column, that first column, and then you can pair it with Star Eater or Harmony for stronger supers or faster supers, depending on how you want to play that. So that's it for me on that side here. For Warlocks, we're going to save the discussion for the exotic class items. Again, I think it's only fair that we wait and see how the Titan one gets tweaked, really to see how that shapes up. We don't know if there's any more traits that might get added in the next episode in Revenant. That would obviously shake things up, but we're going to wait and see before we provide feedback and have just a general discussion of the exotic class items as well as their attainability. So let's get on to our final topic here. This will be Ergo Sum. Again, we're talking about this in this episode particularly because that catalyst has to do with transcendence. And again, this is kind of, the idea is that it's meant to be paired on some level with prismatic subclasses, especially with the catalyst in particular. So this is our first ever special ammo sword in the energy slot, that middle slot. It has base stats, 30 charge rate, and then zeros for our guard resistance and endurance, because that is directly modified by the guard. It does have a base of 60 impact. Does have a minimal impact on the impact stat, has a minimal impact on our damage profile. So for example, Jagged Edge, that blade is a 1.8% difference with Enduring instead of a more typical 6% difference with heavy swords. So when combined with the Transcendence buff, the gap between Jagged and Enduring is even more tiny. We go all the way down to about 0.4% due to how that buff interacts with some of the specific exotic perks on Ergo Sum. So just there's some weird stuff going on with that 60 impact, but also know that Jagged Edge, what we typically recommend, is not quite the obvious pick as it is on heavy swords. Our base ammo count is 35, and the exotic trait here is Transcendent Duelist, intrinsically picks up about less ammo than other swords, and kills grant an additional 2.5% light and 2.5% dark transcendent energy. And while you're transcendent, you do get the 44% increased damage Most of the exotic intrinsic effects are granted about 20% damage increase. There's a plus 50 to your charge rate, and then dealing any sword damage triggers the increased prismatic grenade regeneration speed, and it also extends the transcendent duration on kill. We're still working out the exact specifics of that effect here. That exotic catalyst is called Transcendent Steel, grants plus 3 ammo on prismatic grenade hit, and again, we're still working out if that varies, whether or not it varies on the prismatic grenade type. All right, let's actually get into kind of the difference here between our sword frames, our exotic intrinsic, the 3 random blade perks, and the 2 random guard perks that drop with every version of Ergo Sum here. I'll give a quick reminder of some sword information before passing you over to Court to talk about blades. As a reminder, the charge rate on a sword determines the delay before the sword energy, which is used for heavy attack, is regenerated, and the rate at which it is regenerated. So 10 charge rate equals about 2.65 seconds, 40 charge rate 2.25, 70 charge rate 1.65, and 100 charge rate takes you down to just over a second. It's 1.05. The sword energy regen rate is about 1.35 minus the charge rate stat times 0.01. That's your formula. So for example here, 40 charge rate equals about 1.95 seconds from empty to fully charged energy. Guard resistance determines the amount of damage resistance when you are guarding with the sword against attacks. The higher the guard resistance, the higher the DR. At 0 guard resistance, you have about 82% DR, and at 100 guard resistance, you are looking at 95% damage resistance. And then finally, the guard endurance determines the amount of sword energy that it passively drains while you are guarding with your sword. The higher the guard endurance, the less sword energy drained per second, and guarding against any damage pauses this passive drain for about a few seconds here. A lot of different stats. Again, swords behave very uniquely, but they are pretty meta this episode with some of our artifact perks here. So let's get into the specifics here. Let's talk about blades. I'll pass you over to Court for that discussion.
Yeah, so you've got your usual selection of blades here. You've got Enduring, Hungry, Honed, Jagged, and Tempered. Now, because of how the impact stat is performing on Ergo Sum, we're not going to specifically look at the impact stats. You can view them on various API sites, but we will look at the ammo. So Enduring Blade has 46, which is the highest, followed by Hungry Edge, which is 43, followed by Tempered Edge, which is 41, Honed Edge, 39, and all the way down with Jagged Edge at 35. So as mentioned, Jagged Edge is only roughly 1.8% damage buff, so has far less importance when it comes to damage. Naturally, we would go for Jagged Edge when it comes to a normal sword, just with how expansive the gap between the lower impact to the highest. You have a much larger damage buff compared to Ergo Sum. So considering Ergo Sum's main weakness is its ammo economy, we'll probably be highlighting Enduring Blade for pretty much any build with Ergo Sum. We'll talk about specific builds just in a moment. For the guards, again, it's very much the same. You've got Balance, you've got Burst, Enduring, Heavy, Sword Masters. Won't go into too much details here just because these stats are readily available. I'll just look at like Heavy here, which I think is one that we'll probably focus on. You get slightly less charge rate, which again, not too bad for Ergo Sum, and you get that 70 guard resistance and 60 guard endurance. Swordmasters here that we always recommend for other swords has that 50 charge rate, which is plus 10, 10 guard resistance, and 40 guard endurance. So again, honestly, like heavy swords, there isn't much difference and ultimately comes down to your personal preference. We'll still be recommending Swordmasters for more general play, or heavy, as that's the best when it comes to defense. However, we're getting into more kind of important stats, important frames. So yeah, we have our typical frames: lightweight, aggressive, caster, vortex, and wave. The lightweight, when you heavy attack, that's your fast dash attack that consumes 3 ammo. Aggressive, that's a powerful slam attack that also consumes 3 ammo. Caster is that projectile attack, consumes 4. Vortex is your spin to win, as we call it, and that consumes 6 ammo. And Wave is the brand new sword frame. So under uppercut, which sends forward a ground wave, much like the wave frame grenade launchers, and an immediate follow-up swing deploys a homing strike that aggressively seeks a target, and all of that consumes the heavy attack consumes 4, and then your follow-up attack consumes 1, so that's a total of 5. I'll take the element, just depending on the exotic traits here, all the specifics. Again, not going to go into too much detail. You can see the data compendium for the specifics. You've got 2 per element, 2 for arc, 2 for solar, 2 for void, and then you've got 2 which are that can roll with any element. I'll start here with the any element. So you've got Gathering Light, which is from Traveler's Chosen, and you've obviously got Wolfpack Rounds, which is from Galahorn. So they will roll on any element. It can be arc, solar, or void. And out of the 2 here, obviously it's Wolfpack Rounds, which is the more interesting one. So powered grounded heavy attacks grant Pack Hunter for 10 seconds to nearby Legendary Sword and Ergo Sum wielders. Grounded and airborne powered light attacks release 1 Wolfpack round, and grounded powered heavy attacks release 3 Wolfpack rounds. And as a note, airborne heavy attacks do not spawn Wolfpack rounds. Arc have Arc Conductor, which is from Wristrunner and Stormbringer. Solar has the Perfect Fifth, which is from Polaris Lance, and Sacred Flame, which is from Tiku's Divination. And Void has Insectoid Robot Grenades, which is from the Colony, and Unplanned Reprieve, that is from Telesto, that's the little bolts. Out of the 3 here that we're going to talk about, Arc Conductor, which is from Wristrunner, powered heavy attacks grant Arc Conductor, which is 50% arc damage resistance, and you get some wild chaining lightning from Arc Conductor on the sword. It's quite impressive to watch. The Perfect Fifth, 5 hits applies an explosion on enemy, which applies 40 stacks of Scorch or 60 with Ashes. And Unplanned Reprieve, which is again from the Telesto, powered heavy attacks release multiple Telesto bolts around it depending on the frame. And specifically aggressive, there'll be 8 bolts ahead of you when you cast your heavy attack. Caster, the 6 bolts spawn near the projectile impact area. The lightweight, it's 7 bolts in an arc in front of you. Vortex is 10 bolts around you, and a wave frame sword is 8 bolts around the end of the wave. So those things are quite important when we come to the specific recommendations for the rolls here. Saint, I'll pass it over to you for some.
Yeah, so a lot of options. What are you really looking for here? The number 1 roll we recommend for most DPS scenarios is gonna be that Unplanned Reprieve with a Vortex or Lightweight frame and Enduring Blade for the max total damage on, the your magazine, I guess, slot there. Because again, that Jagged Edge is really gonna make an incredibly minor, like sub 2% difference. So Telesto, pretty surprising pick here. Why would we be using Telesto Sword? It actually deals a massive amount of damage per bolt, and the Vortex and Lightweight versions of this are really easy to activate. The main issue that you can run into here is that some bosses may not trigger all the bolts, or maybe they're moving around in a way that would prevent all the bolts from landing, or anything like that, or they're just too small and they can't activate them all, and they're not moving around enough and have too small of a frame there. So could be some issues there, and we have one more alternate option for that. But the attack combo that you're going to want to use is going to be heavy into light, so 1 heavy, 2 light attacks. And the second backup option for DPS is going to be Perfect Fifth with a caster frame and Enduring Guard again. So if the Telesto bolts are not landing and you're not super keen on Unplanned Reprieve, then this heavy light combo on this guy is going to work incredibly well as well. We have we also have a support and just like a general use one though. Impetus, what do we use him for support recommendation, and then also for our just general use kind of ad clear recommendation?
Well, for support, it's got to be Wolfpack rounds, Galhorn. Hopefully that's not too surprising there. Best one to go with here would be a Vortex or a lightweight frame. And then Enduring, of course, going to be a pretty consistent theme here on the blade. You want to deal support for your other sword and then also for Ergo Sum users. So again, if you have other folks using heavy swords in this environment, give them the Wolfpack rounds through this Ergo Sum roll. And that attack combo here would be 1 heavy to 2 light, similar to the other ones we've mentioned so far. That's our support roll. But if you want to have fun, if you want to go absolutely bonkers, drive your Grandmaster Nightfall partners crazy here, the real one we want to do is Arc Conductor on a wave, a caster, or a lightweight frame Ergo Sum. With that Enduring, it is ridiculous how long those lightning bolts go. They go vertical, which is probably the biggest surprise here. I first became aware of this nonsense when I was running with Court in our Fallen Saber GM. He would jump up to the ship when we were inspecting the downed Warsat, and the bolts would, even when the enemies had dropped down, the chains of lightning would shoot up into the ship and kill any fallen dregs that were just crawling out of the ship. It was absolutely ridiculous. Again, we're talking like 10 meters of range, 10 to 15 meters of range here on those chained lightnings. Of course, once we got inside the GM, you could pretty much hit every enemy in those smaller rooms. So it is effective. It's very fun. Wrist Runner, again, really solid SMG. It'd be kind of crazy if it does get some of the buffs. Its exotic trait is very strong, even on non-SMG weapons. Who'd have thunk? But yeah, you're probably going to want Caster if you want to get really crazy and have that effect proc on a projectile. I think lightweight with just the general mobility vibe of it, that heavy attack will thrust you forward would be really nice. But also a wave as well if you want to kind of combine the best of both worlds, get that wave out, hit a bunch of enemies, get the lightning to kind of take off on a wider area of effect. Plus then the projectile follow up on top of that could be quite strong as well. But yeah, if you have an Arc Conductor one, try it out before you shard it. Especially if you're just thinking, oh, I need damage, or I need support. No. Use Ergo Sum for ad clear. It is very effective in dungeons and GMs. Especially, yeah, if you're looking for something to just run even in a seasonal activity, I think Arc Conductor on Ergo Sum will serve you more than well. It is an ad clearing machine. Any other thoughts to add here, folks? Court, I know you're the one that's actually been using it. Saint, do you have an Arc Conductor Ergo Sum? I've been very unlucky in this business.
I got a lightweight one to drop like 6 days ago. Finally. Ooh. Yeah. So it just, I've only started to discover the power of standing near an enemy when they think it's wise to attack me. Yeah, the last thing I would say on the sword in general is it does so much damage. I don't think I think it is slept on in terms of it being used for a DPS weapon. You have to be, a transcendent, right? You've got to be transcendent for it to work. But when it's working, when you have your unplanned reprieve, whatever lightweight, and you're slanging out this constant attack, you've got maybe your Argent Blade mod on from the artifact and expanding Abyss and all these things, you can do ridiculous amounts of damage with this sword. Don't sleep on that. If you have one of these roles that we've been talking about, don't be afraid to try this in a DPS phase, especially like Herald of Finality, the first boss in Warlord's Ruin. There's several scenarios where this is like very viable, and if you haven't tried it out, you really got to give it a try.
Yeah, it is a very fun sword. I will say, like, some of the other perks, we haven't really mentioned them. So Gathering Light, Stormbringer, Sacred Flame, and Insectoid Robot Grenades, they're just not quite there. I think they could do with some buffs. There's certainly some builds, there's some play to them, but they're certainly not optimal when it comes to some of the kind of wilder builds like Arc Conductor. I will say, so Insectoid Robot Grenades, I'm not sure if that's maybe an older version, because when you kill a higher value target, like a mini-boss or a champion, you still only spawn one of those insect robots instead of where they buffed the original colony to spawn multiple, or depending on the rank of the combatant. So that's something I'd like to see. I was a bit disappointed to see that was not. It just, you only spawned one insectoid robot instead of multiple, depending on the combatant rank. So that could do with a slight buff, and I think that would be a little bit fun to watch. Just use killing an overload champion and then just seeing a burst of those little robots going everywhere. I think that'd be pretty fun. But yeah. Well, lads, this has been quite a thick episode, I should say.
A juicer.
Yeah, absolute juicer. Lots to discuss. I think, as we've already mentioned throughout this particular episode, we will come back, we'll revisit Prismatic and the exotic class item perks, just see how they settle. I think, again, especially for Titans, I know they've been desiring some buffs to the Prismatic kit, as well as the exotic class item perks. So we'll come back and revisit that in a couple months' time, see how things are. Any final words, lads, before we do our usual outro?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to episode 2. It's a ways out. It's still, it's a little less than 2 months out, but everything that they're talking about right now in the upcoming changes seems like very in touch with like the reality of the PvE sandbox, which feels good.
I agree. Very excited for the future of Prismatic, and also I got a lot of grinding to do on a lot of different class items, especially for my other classes.
Yeah, same here. All right, well, that is episode 113. We, of course, want to thank our audio engineer for another great job that he does, especially these long tank of an episodes. Thank you very much, buddy. Next week, we'll be covering those juiced solstice weapons, another classic breakdown. Some great things to talk about with them in our next episode. Until then, my name's Court. You can find me over on various socials as Court Projects, on Discord as the same. You can find my spreadsheets and infographics over on the Destiny 2 link tree. That's Destiny 2 spreadsheets, along with many other spreadsheets and applications to enhance your Destiny experience. Saint, where can we find you?
Yep, my name is Saint Kabir. You can find me by that name on social media, Discord, or in-game, trying to hunt down that damn chain reaction dead grammary. Impetus.
My name is Impetus. I do have a chain reaction dead grammary, and I will be showing off. I'm sorry, I had to. You can find me by that name in Discord and in Destiny, where I'll be shooting my dead grammary as I'm farming for chain, lightning, Ergo Sums, and so many different class item roles. I'm also lurking out on our Twitter account, Pod versus Enemies, taking a look at what the pulse of the community is. Thank you so much for listening to yet another episode. We'll see you next week talking about Solstice. Take care. Have a good one.